You're just a charity case, Janice. With that one sneer, he sealed his own fate. But the arrogant CEO, Ernest Cannon, had no idea who he was really humiliating. He didn't know he was insulting the secret owner of his entire billion-dollar company. This is a story about what happens when absolute power meets quiet dignity. It's a drama that forces us to ask, is a person's worth in their bank account, or in their soul? Get ready for a journey of romance, secrets, and a revenge that nobody, especially him, could ever see coming. This is the story of Janice Medina, the hidden heiress, and Ernest Cannon, the billionaire who had to lose everything to maybe, just maybe, discover true love. What follows is an emotional and heart-touching roller coaster: a secret identity, a massive inheritance, and a plot twist so shocking it will change everything you think about justice and redemption. If you believe that redemption is possible, even for the most arrogant, comment "I'm watching right now." Like this video if you've ever felt underestimated, and subscribe, because this love story is, without a doubt, life-changing. The air in the executive office felt thin, vibrating with a sterile chill. Ernest Cannon, a man whose entire existence was governed by profit margins and ruthless efficiency, stared at the young woman before him. The disdain on his face wasn't even veiled, it was a weapon. "You're just a charity case, Janice," he sneered, his voice clipping the words with precision. To him, she was a box to be checked, a minor philanthropic gesture he was forced to endure. He had no inkling that this woman, Janice Medina, was the secret identity he should fear. He was blissfully unaware that he was actively humiliating the hidden heiress of his entire company. The very foundation he stood on, the billion-dollar empire he so arrogantly commanded, belonged to her. Janice simply absorbed the verbal blow, her gaze steady. Her eyes, which held the secrets of an unimaginable inheritance, didn't waver. This entire drama was, for her, merely the first act of a very quiet, very personal audit. She was seeing, firsthand, the man her father had entrusted with his legacy. Ernest gestured dismissively toward the door, a clear sign of her irrelevance. "Now get out. I have actual business to attend to." For Ernest Cannon, actual business meant hostile takeovers, strategic cruelty, and planning his next extravagant vacation with his fiancée. He couldn't be bothered with what he perceived as the naive, simplistic worldview of a junior assistant. He was completely blind to the core of steel hidden just beneath her quiet compliance, a shocking oversight that would define his future. This oversight was, in fact, the central flaw in his armor. For Janice Medina, every insult was a data point. She wasn't cataloging his cruelty for revenge, not yet. She was seeking clarity. She needed to understand the man running her father's life's work. This twisted rich woman poor man scenario was a farce of her own design. She was the wealthy woman playing the part of the pauper, and the billionaire before her was bankrupt in the only currency that truly mattered: basic human decency. He watched her turn, his mind already moving on to the next negotiation. He didn't give her a second thought. This monumental blunder, this underestimation, was the beginning of the end of his reign. It was also, paradoxically, the very first beat of a love story so profound it would be life-changing. An emotional storm was brewing, and he was standing directly in its path, admiring his own reflection in the clouds. The plot twist was already in motion. As Janice walked back to her small desk in the bullpen, the words "charity case" echoed in her ears. She felt no anger, only a cold, sharpening resolve. The game was afoot. Ernest Cannon had just made the first move, and he didn't even know he was a player. The surprise she was meticulously planning would be one for the history books. She knew that to win, she couldn't just rely on a lawyer to announce her. She had to understand the rot from the inside. This humiliation wasn't a defeat, it was a necessary, painful reconnaissance. She was the owner, the true power, and she was being humiliated by her own employee. The irony was bitter, but it fueled her determination to see this through to the very end, no matter how heart-touching or heartbreaking the journey became. This secret identity was her shield and her sword. While Ernest Cannon sat in his glass tower, believing he was the king, he failed to see the one person who could truly dethrone him. Janice settled into her chair, opened a spreadsheet, and continued her work, a ghost in her own machine. The greatest drama of their lives had just begun, and the opening scene was a quiet tragedy of his own making. Janice Medina operated in the background, a phantom of efficiency. She wasn't just another face in the corporate sea, she was the quiet engine that kept the executive floor running. She arrived before the sun, brewing the first pot of coffee, and often left long after the cleaning crews had finished. Her colleagues saw her as diligent, yes, but hopelessly naive. Her kindness was mistaken for weakness, her quiet brilliance dismissed as simple subservience. "She's too nice for this place," they'd whisper, never knowing the hidden heiress heard every word. She was the one who untangled the most chaotic schedules, who drafted reports that others would spend a week on, and who always had a kind word for the mailroom staff. This was her daily drama, being completely invisible while holding the knowledge that she owned everything she saw. She was a ghost in her own kingdom, studying the infrastructure, the loyalties, the petty corruptions. She wasn't just an assistant, she was a secret identity undertaking the world's most high-stakes anthropological study. Her work ethic was her armor and her camouflage. No one would ever suspect that the woman meticulously sorting Ernest's dry cleaning receipts was the sole beneficiary of a billion-dollar inheritance. It was the ultimate rich woman poor man scenario, except the poor man, Ernest Cannon, was a billionaire, and the rich woman was fetching his lattes. The sheer absurdity of it would have been comical if it weren't so profoundly isolating. She was alone, surrounded by the legacy she was trying to save. Ernest, of course, remained oblivious. To him, her tireless work was just what he paid for. It was baseline. He never noticed her insights, her quiet improvements to his own systems. This dismissal was a constant, low-level humiliation, a reminder of how little he valued anyone but himself. But Janice kept working, her resolve hardening with every oversight. She was playing a long game, one that required a level of patience that Ernest couldn't even comprehend. Her colleagues, meanwhile, were all too happy to exploit her work ethic. "Janice won't mind, will you?"
became a common refrain as they dropped extra work on her desk before heading out for happy hour. And Janice, with her unshakable grace, would simply nod and get it done. But behind that accommodating smile, the hidden heiress was taking meticulous notes. The list of who was competent and who was a parasite grew longer every day. This wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. It was about justice. She needed to know who deserved to stay when the plot twist finally arrived. She needed to know who had earned their place through merit and who was just coasting on Ernest's toxic culture. Her quiet brilliance was a searchlight, illuminating the dark corners of her own company. This tireless act was also a test of her own character. Could she withstand the daily indignities without becoming bitter? Could she hold on to her own values while immersed in a world that had none? Every day was a battle for her own soul. The emotional toll was heavy, but she knew it was the only way. She had to be more than just an heir, she had to be a leader. And so, she worked. She worked until her fingers ached and her eyes burned. She worked because it was the only way to honor her father, and the only way to prepare for the life-changing moment when her secret identity would finally be revealed. She was the owner, the boss, the power, and she was the most dismissed person in the building. Ernest Cannon was a man forged in the crucible of hostile markets. He was a billion-dollar prodigy, a cutthroat visionary who saw the world in spreadsheets, risk assessments, and bottom lines. Emotions to him were liabilities. Trust was a commodity to be leveraged, not a gift to be given. In his world, numbers didn't lie. People, on the other hand, lied constantly. He trusted only what he could quantify, and a person's soul didn't have a ticker symbol. He had built his empire, rather, expanded the one had been given to manage with a surgical precision that terrified his competitors. He was the apex predator of the corporate world. Because of this, he viewed Janice Medina not as a person, but as a statistical anomaly. Her kindness didn't compute. Her quiet integrity didn't fit his algorithms. In his Shark Tank, she was a goldfish, harmless, decorative, and utterly irrelevant to the food chain. She was beneath his notice. He saw her as just another naive employee, a charity case had inherited, destined to be chewed up and spit out by the high-pressure environment he cultivated. He was utterly blind to the hidden heiress standing right in front of him. This arrogant blindness, this total reliance on his own flawed metrics, was his greatest vulnerability. It was a crack in his fortress of numbers, and Janice was the one person who could slip through it. His entire life was a carefully curated series of transactions. Even his engagement was a merger, a strategic alliance between two powerful families. His fiancée, Isabella, was just as cold and calculating as he was, a quality he mistook for strength. The concept of true love was something he scoffed at, a fairy tale for the masses. His was a romance of assets and appearances, completely hollow. This is why Janice's genuine nature, her quiet empathy, was so profoundly confusing to him on a subconscious level. He dealt with his confusion the only way he knew how, by dismissing it, by lashing out, by reinforcing his belief that she was weak. When she had once suggested a small, empathetic change to a company policy, had shut her down in a public meeting, the humiliation sharp and sudden. He couldn't process authenticity. He had no idea of the drama unfolding around him. He didn't know that the woman he treated like furniture was the sole owner of his kingdom. Her secret identity was a perfect time bomb, ticking silently beneath his polished desk, while he sat back, admiring his own reflection in the blast-proof glass. The surprise awaiting him wasn't just shocking, it was an extinction-level event. His world was binary predator or prey, strong or weak, asset or liability. There was no room for nuance. There was no room for a rich woman, poor man paradox. The idea that the person bringing him coffee could be the one to sign his termination papers was beyond the scope of his imagination. This failure of imagination would be his ultimate downfall. And so, he continued on his path, a king blind in his own court. He made billion-dollar deals, he humiliated subordinates, and he never once really looked, at the quiet assistant who was, in fact, the only person in the world who could grant him redemption. He was a genius in business, but a fool in life. The annual company gala was a pinnacle of Ernest Cannon's world. It was a glittering, opulent affair, a sea of designer gowns, expensive champagne, and razor-sharp smiles. This was his court, and he was the undisputed king. He moved through the crowd with his fiancée, Isabella, on his arm. She was as beautiful and predatory as he was. And Janice Medina, of course, was there too, not as a guest, but as staff, running interference backstage, a headset her only accessory. The hidden heiress was, for the night, a glorified servant. A minor crisis with the catering required Janice to find Ernest on the main floor. She navigated the glittering crowd, a small, dark-clad figure in a sea of peacocks. She found him just as Isabella was telling a story. When Isabella saw her, her eyes narrowed, seeing an opportunity to demonstrate her own power and perhaps sensing an irrational flicker of jealousy. She decided to make an example. She stopped Janice mid-stride, and a hush fell over the immediate area. "My necklace," Isabella said, her voice like ice, touching her own bare throat. "It's gone." Janice paused, completely bewildered. "I'm sorry?" Isabella's voice rose, capturing more attention. "My diamond necklace. The one Ernest gave me. It was in the powder room. You were the only other person in there." The accusation was immediate, poisonous, and devastatingly public. It was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to utterly humiliate the charity case. All eyes turned to Janice. The drama was thick and suffocating. But if Isabella expected tears, a breakdown, or frantic denials, she was sorely mistaken. Janice Medina simply stood there, her spine straightening. She met Isabella's cold gaze and held it. "I did not take your necklace, Miss Isabella," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I suggest you retrace your steps. Perhaps the head of security should check the camera footage." Her dignity was unshakable. It was a wall of quiet strength against which Isabella's manufactured hysteria shattered. The composure was shocking. What one word describes Janice's response right now? Drop it in the comments below. This was a plot twist no one saw coming. The assistant wasn't cowering. She was, in fact, subtly issuing a challenge. Just then, Isabella's own assistant rushed up, pale-faced. "Ms. Isabella, you left in the car. The driver has it." The bubble of tension popped. Isabella, furious at being undermined, tried to laugh it off as a silly mistake. But the damage was done. Not to Janice, but to Isabella. She had shown her cruelty, and Janice had shown her class. The crowd's gaze shifted, and the respect, however fleeting, was now on Janice. Ernest Cannon had watched the entire exchange, his expression unreadable. He had expected his assistant to crumble. He had expected to be embarrassed by her. Instead, he felt a strange, unfamiliar pang. It wasn't respect, not yet. It was confusion. His fiancée had acted like a child, and the charity case had acted like a queen. This single encounter planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Janice simply nodded. "If you'll excuse me," she said, and continued on her errand, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The hidden heiress had just won her first public battle, without ever raising her voice. The love story that was to come was not yet even a thought, but the foundation of Ernest's perception of her had just developed its very first crack. It was, in its own small way, life-changing. Ernest Cannon watched her walk away. He saw the whispers, the sideways glances. His fiancée, Isabella, was fuming beside him, her public humiliation far greater than any she could have inflicted. "What a dreadful little scene," she hissed, attempting to regain control. But Ernest wasn't listening. His mind was replaying the last 30 seconds. He was a man who understood power dynamics better than anyone, and what he had just witnessed was a shocking display of power. It wasn't the loud, brutish power he was used to. It wasn't the power of a billion-dollar bank account or a hostile takeover. It was the power of unshakable composure. It was the power of integrity. And for the very first time, as he watched Janice's departing figure, he felt an unexpected, unwelcome, and deeply confusing pang of respect for her. Had never respected anyone who couldn't destroy him. And yet, later that night, he found himself questioning his fiancée's behavior for the first time. That was, "Beneath you, Isabella," he said in the cold quiet of their car. She reacted with predictable outrage. "Beneath me? That little charity case accused me of being careless." But Ernest shook his head. "No," he said, his voice quiet. She responded with dignity. "You did not." This was the first stone he had ever thrown in their glass house. This incident was a catalyst. The drama of the gala didn't end when the music stopped. It had planted a seed in Ernest's mind. He, who trusted only numbers, was forced to reevaluate a person based on intangible data, her character. It was a foreign concept, and it unsettled him. He began to wonder what else he had been wrong about. What else had he missed about the quiet assistant he so casually humiliated? He couldn't get her composure out of his head. It was a plot twist in his own internal narrative. He had always seen her as weak, naive, a soft-hearted fool in a world of sharks. But what he saw at the gala was not weakness. It was a strength he couldn't define, a strength that made Isabella's power play look pathetic and small. The hidden heiress was beginning to emerge, not in wealth, but in character. This spark of respect was the very beginning of a much larger, life-changing shift. It wasn't a romance, not by a long shot. It was a grudging, intellectual curiosity. He was a problem solver, and Janice Medina had just become the most complex problem he had ever encountered. He found himself wanting to understand what made her tick. He wanted to know why she was so different. This newfound curiosity would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to either his redemption or his ruin. He was intrigued by her authenticity, a quality so rare in his gold-digging circle that it felt like a precious commodity. He started to see her, really see her, for the first time, not as a charity case, but as an enigma, and that, for a man like Ernest Cannon, was a far more dangerous proposition. He was a man who had to solve every puzzle. He didn't know that this love story, this emotional journey, would be the one puzzle that would ultimately take him apart and rebuild him from scratch. The surprise was that he was beginning to feel, and it terrified him. Ernest's newfound curiosity about Janice Medina was an itch he couldn't scratch. It went against every cynical instinct he had. Was her composure at the gala a fluke? Was her integrity Just a well-played act? In his world, everyone had a price. He had built his billion-dollar empire on that single, unwavering belief. He had to know her price. He couldn't just ask, he had to test. He decided to set a trap, a loyalty test to see if her virtue could be quantified in dollars. He summoned her to his office a few days later. The atmosphere was different. He was no longer dismissive, he was assessing. He concocted a plausible, high-stakes drama. Janice, he began, his tone confidential, him in a difficult position. He spun a tale about a competitor, a fake, secret deal, and a desperate need for leverage. He pushed a plain manila envelope across his desk. This is a fake, secret. I need leaked to them. It will give us an advantage. Then he pushed a second, much thicker envelope next to it. And this, he said, his eyes locking onto hers, is for your trouble. A bonus. For your discretion. The bribe was significant. Easily a year's salary for her. It was a life-changing amount of money for anyone in her position. He watched her like a hawk, waiting for the flicker of greed, the moment of calculation. This was the test. This would prove she was just like everyone else. Janice looked at the file, then at the envelope of cash. She didn't look tempted. She didn't look conflicted. She just looked sad. Her gaze lifted to meet his, and there was no fear in her eyes, only a profound, heart-touching disappointment. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "is this what you think of me?" She flatly refused, not even touching the money. "I won't do it," she said. "My integrity is not for sale, Mr. Cannon. Not for this, not for any price." She didn't just refuse, she cited integrity as her reason, as if it were a line item on a balance sheet had somehow missed. "If you need someone to commit corporate espionage, you'll have to find someone else. I would rather be fired than betray this company." Ernest was genuinely, utterly shocked. He had expected a negotiation. He had expected her to nervously refuse, giving him a chance to sweet-talk her. He had not expected this. This immediate, absolute, ironclad refusal based on principle. It was a variable he had never encountered. The hidden heiress had just passed a test she didn't even know she was taking. He was so stunned he couldn't speak for a moment. He had set a trap for her, and in doing so, had revealed his own character. She, the charity case, had more honor than he. The billion-dollar CEO, the power dynamic in the room shifted. So suddenly it gave him vertigo. She wasn't a subordinate. In that moment, she was his moral superior. Let's be honest. If you were in her shoes, would you have taken the money? What would you have done? Share your thoughts. Janice stood by her values. Proving her worth had nothing to do with her paycheck. This plot twist floored Ernest. He had tried to expose her as a fraud, and instead, he had exposed himself as a cynic. Her honesty was a mirror, and he did not like the reflection. The silence in the office was deafening. Ernest stared at the envelope of money Janice had refused to touch. He was shocked, but more than that, he was deeply, profoundly ashamed. He, Ernest Cannon, the man who controlled markets, had just been morally body-slammed by his junior assistant. He had treated her like a charity case, and she had responded with the dignity of a queen. Her honesty wasn't an act, it was the core of who she was. He found himself drawn to this authenticity, like a moth to a flame. It was a quality so rare, so entirely missing from his gold-digging circle, that it felt alien and precious. His fiancée, his associates, his friends, they were all transactional. They wanted a piece of his power, his influence, his billion-dollar fortune. They told him what he wanted to hear. Janice Medina had just told him the truth, even when it could have cost her everything. This single event began to chip away at the cynical foundation of his entire worldview. What if he was wrong? What if people weren't all motivated by greed? What if integrity, a quality he couldn't measure, was actually the most valuable asset of all? It was a life-changing thought, and it terrified him. He started watching Janice, not as an employee, but as a puzzle he desperately needed to solve. The love story that was beginning to form was not a romance of passion. It was a romance of the mind. He was falling for her character. He was starting to see the hidden heiress in spirit, even with no knowledge of her inheritance. He found himself wanting to protect her, not as a charity case, but as one who would protect the last good thing in a corrupt and dying world. The internal drama raging inside Ernest was intense. He was at war with himself. A part of him, the old, cynical part, wanted to fire her, to get rid of this emotional variable that was screwing up all his equations. But a new, quieter part of him wanted to get closer, to understand her, to maybe even learn from her. The surprise of his own feelings was disorienting. He began to invent reasons to speak with her. Head stopped by her desk to ask about a trivial report, just to hear her no-nonsense, honest opinion. He was starving for something real, and in his entire, glittering, hollow life, Janice Medina was the only authentic thing he had ever encountered. The irony was staggering. The man who had everything was being saved by the woman he believed had nothing. This shift was the story's critical turning point. Ernest was on the verge of either a massive breakthrough or a complete breakdown. He was starting to care, and in his world, caring was a weakness. But he couldn't stop. He was drawn to her. He was beginning to realize that his quest for redemption wasn't about his business. It was about his soul, and Janice held the map. This was the hook. The audience can no longer predict his actions. Will he become a better man, or will his old nature reassert itself and destroy her? The ruthless billionaire was developing a heart, and the plot twist was that it was making him vulnerable. His entire world was about to be challenged, not by a competitor, but by the quiet assistant head humiliated. The change in Ernest wasn't overnight, but it was seismic. He started doing something he had never done in his entire career. He started to listen. He began to actively seek out Janice's opinion. At first, it was small. "Janice, what's your take on the new internal memo?" But her answers were so insightful, so refreshingly devoid of flattery, and so focused on a human impact that he found himself bringing her bigger problems. "Janice, look at these projections," he'd say, handing her a billion-dollar proposal. And she, the supposed charity case, would analyze them with a brilliant, empathetic clarity. "The profit margin is high, Mr. Cannon," she'd say, "but the community impact study is flawed. It's going to displace 300 families. The long-term reputational costs will outweigh the short-term gain." No one had ever spoken to him about reputational costs or community. They spoke of acceptable losses. Her ideas began to fundamentally challenge his ruthless business model. To the utter shocking surprise of his board, he began to implement her suggestions. He scrapped a hostile development project, the one she had flagged. Instead, he channeled a fraction of those funds into a community partnership program that Janice had quietly drafted. The result? His numbers didn't just hold, they improved. Employee morale skyrocketed. He was discovering in real time that empathy wasn't a liability, it was a life-changing asset. This newfound professional respect was bleeding into something personal. It was a slow-burn romance of the most unexpected kind. He'd find himself smiling after talking to her. He noticed the way she'd tuck her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. He was falling for the mind and the heart of the hidden heiress, and he didn't even know her secret identity. He was, for the first time, on the path to true love. This drama did not go unnoticed. Isabella, his fiancée, saw everything. She saw the new softness in his eyes when he spoke to the assistant. She saw the frequency of their meetings. The jealousy that had been a casual sport at the gala now became a cold, potent poison. She didn't just see Janice as an annoyance anymore. She saw her as a direct threat to her billion-dollar merger, her entire future. Ernest, blinded by his own awakening, was oblivious to the danger he was putting Janice in. He was so focused on his own redemption, on how Janice made him feel like a better man, that he failed to see the revenge his fiancée was beginning to plot. The hidden heiress had inadvertently won the king's respect, but in doing so, she had just declared war on the queen. The stakes were rising. Ernest was changing his company from the inside out, inspired by the one person head humiliated. He was building a new foundation based on trust and integrity. But he was building it on a fault line, and his jealous fiancée was about to trigger the earthquake. The love story was becoming incredibly dangerous. Janice, for her part, simply continued to give her honest counsel. She was pleased he was listening, but she remained cautious. She knew his world. She knew people like Isabella. She was walking a tightrope, trying to guide him toward the light, all while knowing that a single misstep could send her plunging into the darkness. The emotional tension was becoming unbearable. Isabella's jealousy was not a fiery, passionate thing. It was a cold, meticulous calculation. She knew confronting Ernest was pointless. He was enchanted by his new project. Attacking Janice directly was also risky. The girl had proven surprisingly resilient. No, Isabella would do what she did best. She would destroy Janice by using Ernest's own world against him. She would frame her for the one crime he could never forgive: betraying his company. She moved with the silent precision of a predator. Using her high-level access as the CEO's fiancée, she waited for the perfect moment. One late night, when the building was empty, she let herself into the executive floor. She used a sophisticated spoofing device to gain access to Janice's workstation, bypassing security. It was a drama of high-tech revenge, and Isabella was the star. She created a devastating digital trail. She accessed the company's most sensitive project files of plans for a new billion-dollar acquisition. Ernest was counting on and transferred them to an offshore server controlled by their biggest competitor. It was a massive corporate espionage plot, and she made it look like the entire breach originated from Janice Medina's user credentials. The final, brilliant stroke was a financial proof. Isabella forged bank transfer records, routing a large sum of untraceable cryptocurrency from a shell corporation linked to competitor to a newly created offshore account in Janice's name. It was a perfect trap. It made Janice's earlier refusal of Ernest's bribe look like a negotiating tactic. She had simply been holding out for a bigger payday. Isabella knew this wouldn't just ruin Janice, it would destroy Ernest. It would shatter his newfound faith in humanity. It would validate every cynical, ruthless belief he had ever held. She wasn't just getting rid of a rival, she was saving Ernest from his own weakness, proving to him that his charity case was just like everyone else. It was a shocking, twisted, and evil plan. The next morning, the alarms blared. A system-wide security alert was triggered. Ernest was pulled into an emergency meeting with his heads of security and IT. They laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece. The IP log from Janice's desk, the exact timestamp of the data transfer, and finally, the bank records. The proof was absolute. The man who was just starting to believe in true love felt the floor drop out from under him. The emotional shock was so profound it felt physical. The woman he was beginning to trust, the one pure thing in his life, was apparently the greatest fraud of all. The hidden heiress had been perfectly and diabolically framed. The plot twist was brutal. Isabella had used Ernest's own test against him. She had used his one moment of vulnerability, his loyalty test, as the blueprint for her revenge. She knew he had tested Janice with a bribe, so she framed her with a bigger one. And Ernest, blinded by the data, walked right into the trap. Ernest's burgeoning redemption shattered instantly. The pain of betrayal was so intense, it curdled into a volcanic, white-hot rage. It wasn't just anger, it was the agony of a man who had allowed himself to hope, only to have that hope humiliated. He felt like a fool. The evidence was so overwhelming, so perfectly aligned with his old, cynical worldview, that he didn't question it for a second. Isabella's revenge was a masterpiece. He didn't call Janice into his office. He didn't give her the dignity of a private execution. He stormed out onto the open plan floor, the entire office freezing at the sight of his fury. He marched directly to her desk. Janice looked up, her brow furrowing in confusion, and her innocent expression only fueled his rage. "How could you?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "Mr. Cannon, what's wrong?" she asked, starting to stand. "I knew it," he roared, and the entire floor flinched. The drama was terrifyingly public. "I knew you were just like the rest. The Integrity Act, the loyalty test. It was all a game, wasn't it?" He slammed the forged bank records down on her desk. "Corporate espionage, Janice? Was this your price? Just a little higher than my last offer?" Janice's face went from confusion to shocking, pale horror. "Ernest, I don't know what this is. I didn't do this," she pleaded, her voice trembling, but her words were lost in the inferno of his rage. "You're fired," he bellowed. "Security, get her out of my building. Now." The humiliation was absolute, a public crucifixion. 2 security guards, looking uncomfortable, moved to grab her arms. She was in such shock, she could barely stand. "I knew you were just like the rest," Ernest whispered, his voice now filled with cold, dead venom as they began to drag her away. "You are, and you always were, just a charity case." He threw her own words, her own integrity, back in her face. Her colleagues, who had minutes before been her friends, now stared with a mixture of horror and contempt. Her reputation, her life, was ruined. The hidden heiress was being frog-marched out of her own billion-dollar building like a common criminal. This was the ultimate false defeat. It seemed that all her work, all her patience, had been for nothing. As Janice was shoved out onto the sidewalk, the glass doors sealing shut behind her, Ernest stood trembling in the middle of the office. He was trembling with rage, and with a heartbreak so profound he couldn't even name it. He had just exorcised the one person who could have saved him. The plot twist was that in exposing her, he had destroyed himself. This is the moment the audience despairs. All hope seems lost. The hero is defeated. The villain has won, and the man she was trying to save has become the monster. What would you have screamed back at him in that moment? This emotional, heart-touching low point is the ultimate re-engagement hook, leaving the audience desperate for revenge and redemption. With Janice Medina gone, a cold, grim normalcy settled back over the corporation. The story of the traitorous assistant spread like wildfire, cementing Ernest's reputation as a hard-nosed leader who cut out betrayal at the root. Isabella was constantly at his side, playing the part of a supportive, sympathetic fiancée. She comforted him through his ordeal, reinforcing his decision and praising his strength for seeing through the deceit of the charity case. They celebrated their engagement soon after, with an extravagant party that was meant to be a display of their united power. It was a triumph. But as Ernest stood there, a glass of champagne in his hand, surrounded by the wealthy and the powerful, he felt nothing. He felt hollow. The victory tasted like ash. The billion-dollar deals, the congratulations, the fawning smiles had all felt like a grotesque, meaningless drama. He tried to force the feeling down. He had done the right thing. The evidence was absolute. But a sliver of doubt, a tiny, persistent voice, kept replaying the look of shocking horror on Janice's face. It wasn't a look of someone caught. It was a look of someone innocent. He humiliated that memory, crushing it with a fact of case. But it remained. Meanwhile, Janice vanished, completely devastated, her professional reputation shattered, and her name dragged through the mud. She simply disappeared. She didn't call her lawyer. She didn't try to fight. The betrayal from Ernest, the one person she had started to believe in, was a deeper wound than the false accusation. She had lost her love story before it even began. She retreated from the world to heal and to decide what to do with her inheritance and the man who had so publicly broken her. Ernest, in her absence, threw himself back into his work with a renewed, almost manic ruthlessness. He became more cutthroat than ever, as if to prove to himself that his old, cynical self was the correct one. But the hollowness didn't go away. He had his fiancée, his company, his power, and he had never felt more alone. The hidden heiress was gone, and she had taken his nascent soul with her. He was celebrating his engagement, but the only person he could think about was the woman he had destroyed. The romance he had almost allowed himself to feel had curdled into a toxic brew of guilt and anger. He was at the absolute pinnacle of his life, and he was profoundly, desperately miserable. He had won, but it was the emptiest, most emotional victory of his life. This emptiness was the first crack in Isabella's perfect revenge. She had removed Janice, but she had replaced her with a ghost that was now haunting the man she was trying to win. Ernest was trapped in a cage of his own making, celebrating a life he no longer wanted, with a woman he was beginning to despise. This period of emptiness was crucial. It was a quiet before the storm, the necessary void that would make the eventual redemption even more powerful. He had to hit rock bottom, surrounded by his success, to finally realize what he had truly lost. And that realization was about to hit him with the force of a freight train. The celebration was over, but the paperwork was not. The company's legal department needed to finalize the case against Janice Medina, creating an ironclad file for a potential lawsuit and for the corporate records. It was a standard procedure. The head lawyer asked Ernest to give a final sign-off on the evidence bundle. which included a complete, unedited security footage from a night of the breach. Ernest, wanting only to close this painful chapter for good, agreed. He dismissed his staff, locked his office door, and sat alone in the dark, the monitors casting a cold blue light on his face. He fast-forwarded through the footage, impatient. He saw Janice leave at her usual time, 7:03 p.m. He kept watching, the hours ticking by. 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. Then, at 11:47 p.m., the motion sensor on the executive floor triggered. He paused. It wasn't Janice. It was Isabella. He froze, his blood turning to ice. He rewound the footage and played it at normal speed. He watched, with a sickening, dawning horror, as his fiancée, Isabella, looked nervously down the hall before slipping into Janice's cubicle. He watched her use a device to activate Janice's workstation. He watched her navigate the servers. He watched her initiate the data transfer. He saw her plant the evidence. The entire drama, the entire setup, his entire rage, was based on a lie. It wasn't a plot twist. It was a life-changing avalanche of truth. It was all her. The revenge was Isabella's. The shocking surprise was so profound he couldn't breathe. It wasn't Janice. It was never Janice. He had been played. He had been manipulated by the one person he thought was his partner. He hadn't been betrayed by the charity case. He had been blinded by the real gold digger. The image of Janice's face as the guards dragged her away flashed in his mind. Her plea of innocence. His own venomous words, "I knew you were just like the rest." The humiliation he had heaped on her. He felt a wave of nausea, so powerful, he nearly doubled over. The hollowness had been feeling wasn't grief, it was guilt. It was his conscience, screaming at him. He replayed the footage again, and again. Each viewing was another nail in the coffin of his old self. He saw Isabella smile as she logged off, a smile of pure, triumphant malice. He realized he hadn't just fired an innocent woman. He had publicly destroyed the only person who had ever been truly loyal to him. He finally understood. He hadn't just lost an employee. He had lost his one chance at true love. He had lost his shot at redemption. And he had done it with his own two hands. All because he was too arrogant and too broken to believe that someone could actually be good. The shame that crashed over Ernest was absolute. It was a physical weight, crushing the arrogance out of him, leaving only a raw, gaping wound. He hadn't just driven away the only genuine person had ever known, he had crucified her. He had become the villain in his own love story. The quest for redemption began in that dark office, with the damning footage playing on a loop. His first move was swift and brutal. He canceled the engagement. The confrontation with Isabella was not a drama. It was an execution. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He simply played the video for her. Her face, draining of all color, was all the confession he needed. He had security escort her from the building, her partner turning all his corporate legal fury on her. The revenge she had plotted had backfired spectacularly, but that brought him no satisfaction. It didn't fix what was broken. It didn't undo the humiliation had inflicted on Janice. He mobilized his entire personal security team, his private investigators, every resource his billion-dollar fortune could buy. His new obsession wasn't his company, it was finding Janice Medina. He had to find her. He had to beg for her forgiveness, even though he knew he didn't deserve it. Days turned into agonizing weeks. He didn't sleep. He barely ate. His empire, the thing he protected at her expense, crumbled around him as he ignored it. The irony was bitter. He had protected his assets and, in doing so, lost the only thing that had ever mattered. He realized true love wasn't a liability. It was the only thing that was real. His investigators hit wall after wall. Janice had vanished. She wasn't using her credit cards. Her social security number wasn't active. She hadn't contacted any of her old friends. It was as if the hidden heiress had become a ghost. He was terrified. He was haunted by images of what he might have driven her to. The emotional toll of his search was breaking him. This desperate search wasn't just about her, it was about him. It was a pilgrimage. He was searching for his own lost soul. He finally understood that all his success, all his wealth, was meaningless. It was a pile of cold, Dead cash. Janice, with her quiet integrity, was life. He would have given every cent, his entire billion-dollar inheritance, or so he thought it was his, just for one more chance. He drove himself mad, following dead-end leads, interviewing anyone who had ever spoken to her. He was a man possessed. He had to find her. He had to prove to her, and to himself, that he was more than the monster he had been. He was a man desperate for a life-changing second chance. But he couldn't find her. The charity case he had dismissed so easily was now the only person in the world he needed, and she was gone. The plot twist was that in his arrogance, he had never even bothered to know where she came from or who she really was. He had no leads, because he had never truly seen her at all. After weeks of frantic, dead-end searching, one of his investigators finally got a hit. It was the most unexpected plot twist of all. She wasn't in New York. She wasn't in Europe. She was working at a small, dusty, small-town library hundreds of miles away. The hidden heiress was reshelving books, finding solace in quiet and the smell of old paper. Ernest didn't send a lawyer. He didn't call. He got in his car and drove for 9 hours straight, his heart pounding with a sickening mixture of hope and terror. He walked into the quiet library, the small bell on the door jangling, announcing his arrival. And there she was. She looked thinner, and the light in her eyes had dimmed, but it was her. When she looked up and saw him, she didn't gasp. She just flinched, as if expecting a blow. "Janice," he breathed, his voice hoarse. She stood up, putting a book between them like a shield. "You need to leave, Mr. Cannon," she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was cold. It was dead. The Ernest she had started to use was gone. The formality was a slap in the face. "You don't have the right to be here." "Janice, please," he said, taking a step forward, his hands raised in surrender. "I know. I saw the tape. I know it was Isabella. I know you're innocent. I know everything." He expected. He didn't know what he expected. Relief? Tears? Maybe, but he didn't get them. Her face remained cold, her trust completely, irrevocably broken. "You know?" she repeated, her voice dripping with a quiet irony. "You know now, but you know then, did you? When it mattered, when you stood there, and you humiliated me in front of everyone. The drama that day was still raw, still bleeding. You didn't know when you called me a charity case," she continued, her voice gaining a slight tremor, not a weakness, but a strength. "You didn't trust me, Ernest. You trusted the evidence because it's what you always believed about me, that I was nothing, that I was worthless. I was a fool," he pleaded, the word tearing from his throat. "I was an arrogant, blind fool. I'm so sorry, Janice. Please." The redemption he was begging for was not forthcoming. "I don't want your apology," she said, turning her back on him. "It doesn't fix what you broke. It doesn't fix me. Please, just go. I was healing. Don't. Just don't." Her rejection was absolute. The true love he had realized too late was gone. He stood there, defeated, realizing that rebuilding her trust would be harder than building his billion-dollar empire. He left the library, a broken man. The annual shareholder meeting was a tense, somber affair. The company was still reeling from the dual scandals, the espionage, and the subsequent shocking revelation of Isabella's fraud. Ernest Cannon was on stage, a shell of his former self, attempting to rally his investors. He was detailing a new ethics policy, his voice hollow, when the main doors of the auditorium swung open. The meeting was interrupted. A man, impeccably dressed, walked down the aisle with an air of absolute authority. It was Mr. Harrison, the senior lawyer for the company's late founder, a man Ernest hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Cannon, my apologies for this interruption." Harrison's voice boomed over the microphone. "There's a pressing matter of corporate governance that must be addressed." Immediately, Ernest, confused, yielded the podium. The room was silent, as of 9:00 a.m. this morning. The lawyer continued. "The final stipulation in the founders will have been met. The incognito period has expired." A murmur went through the crowd. The controlling interest of this corporation no longer rests in a blind trust. It passes, effective immediately, to the founder's sole heir. The drama was palpable, "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison said, turning to the open doors, "it is my profound honor to introduce your new majority owner and the chairwoman of the board." The surprise was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ms. Janice Medina. The plot twisted the room like a physical shockwave. Every head turned, and there, walking down the aisle, was Janice. But this was not the assistant. This was not the librarian. This was a woman transformed, dressed in a sharply tailored power suit, her hair back, her gaze steady and commanding. She was a hidden heiress revealed. She was the inheritance. She was the billion-dollar fortune. The charity case owned everything. The rich woman, poor man narrative was flipped on its head in the most shocking way imaginable. She walked past the stunned faces, her expression calm and unreadable. Ernest stood on the stage, frozen. His blood ran cold. He was looking at the woman he had humiliated, the woman whose forgiveness he had begged for, the woman he had broken. And she was now literally his boss. His fate, his company, his entire life was now in her hands. She ascended the steps to the stage, not even glancing at him. She walked straight to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at her company. The power shift was absolute, silent, and terrifying. The final act of their love story, or their revenge tragedy, was about to begin. Janice Medina stood at the podium, a portrait of calm authority. She didn't look at Ernest. She addressed the shareholders, her shareholders. She spoke with a clarity and vision that captivated the room. She spoke of her father's original dream, of ethical business, of valuing people over profit, of integrity. Every word she spoke was a quiet indictment of how Ernest had run her company. It was a masterful, emotional performance. Ernest watched her, mesmerized. The hidden heiress was gone, replaced by this powerful, incredible woman. This was the true love he had been too blind to see. This was the leader he had tried to break. The inheritance wasn't just the money, it was her character, her strength. He was overwhelmed with a mix of awe, shame, and a desperate, aching love. When her speech concluded, the room, after a beat of stunned silence, exploded into applause. She had won them over in 5 minutes. Only then did she finally turn and look at him. Her eyes were not filled with revenge. They weren't filled with pity. They were just clear. They were waiting. And in that moment, in front of his entire board and all his investors, Ernest Cannon broke. He stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Janice, Ms. Medina." He didn't care about the drama. He didn't care about his pride. "What I did to you was unforgivable," he said, his voice raw and carrying through the silent room. "I'm not begging for my job. I am not begging as a CEO." He looked her straight in the eye. "I am begging as a man who was blind and arrogant and who destroyed the only good thing he ever had. I publicly humiliated you, and I am publicly begging for your forgiveness." He was offering his ultimate redemption, not for his job, but for his soul. The silence was absolute. If you were Janice, what would you say? Would you forgive him? It was a heart-touching moment. He was vowing to earn back her trust, no matter how long it took. Janice held his gaze for a long, agonizing moment. The billion-dollar decision was hers. Finally, she gave the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. "Get up, Ernest," she said, her voice quiet but firm for his ears only. "We have a lot of work to do." It wasn't a yes. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't a no. It was a plot twist of a different kind of start of a long, hard road. The love story wasn't over. It was just beginning its most life-changing chapter. He hadn't won her back, but she had given him the slimmest chance to try. And for him, that chance was worth more than the entire billion-dollar company. In the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't the billion-dollar fortune, but the discovery of true love and redemption. Janice and Ernest's heart-touching journey proves that a person's true worth is never visible at a glance, and that even the hardest heart can find its way back. If you also believe that integrity is the ultimate superpower, and that everyone deserves a second chance, even if they have to fight like hell for it, then you found your place. Subscribe and join our community of giant hearts. Let's make this emotional story explode. Like this video to spread this life-changing message of hope. Comment with the one moment in this entire drama that was the most shocking to you. Share this with that one person who needs a reminder that incredible plot twists can happen. And while you wait for the next story, know that our channel is a treasure chest of journeys, just like this one. Explore our older videos and discover other unforgettable stories that will hook you from start to finish. And to make sure you don't miss any of the incredible romance and drama we have yet to tell, hit that notification bell to stay updated. You won't want to miss what's coming next.